Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Bombardier Sebastian Lindy. Today, we commemorate the 150th anniversary of the raising of the New South Wales Colonial Government's first permanent battery of artillery. Today, the Royal Australian Artillery recognises this date as the anniversary of its origin. Military defence was the responsibility of these were founded. Their military defence was the responsibility of the British government. But by the late 1860s, the duty of raising and funding military forces increasingly fell on the colonies themselves. The artillery defence of Australia changed from British permanent batteries, augmented by volunteer and militia batteries raised in the colonies, to artillery units of the Australian colonies. While the action of New South Wales in raising its permanent artillery battery in 1871 was the first in Australia, within a short period, the other colonies also raised permanent batteries to complement their militia as demands for self-defence grew. In 1899, the title of Royal Regiments of Australian Artillery was conferred on the permanent units of 3 colonies, a title that carried through Federation to today's United Force. The 1st of August is a date of symbolic significance to all units and gunners serving and retired across all states and territories to celebrate and commemorate the role of Australian artillery. We warmly welcome the family of Corporal Frank Oswald Matt, whose story will be told shortly. We are honoured to acknowledge the Honourable Andrew Gee, Minister for Veterans Affairs and Minister for Defence Personnel, Lieutenant General Rick Burr, Chief of Army, Major General Anthony Rawlins, Deputy Chief of Army, Major General Paul Stevens, retired, Representative Colonel Commandant of the Royal Regiment of Australian Artillery, and Brigadier Richard Vagg, Head of Regiment, Royal Regiment of Australian Artillery. We also acknowledge the past and present members of the Royal Regiment of Australian Artillery who are attending today's special ceremony. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catafalque party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Australians, all let us rejoice, for we are one and free. With gold and soil and wealth for toil, our home is good by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
If you're seated, please do so. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Corporal Frank Oswald Matt. Frank Matt was born on the 26th of October, 1893, the second son of Edward and May Matt of South Yarra in Melbourne. Frank's mother died when he was 7 years old, and his father remarried the following year. Frank was brought up in St Kilda, where he attended Brighton Road State School. During his school years, he served with the cadets, and finding an interest in the military, enlisted for service as a professional soldier with the Royal Australian Field Artillery. Frank Matt enlisted for active service in the Australian Imperial Force shortly after the outbreak of war in August 1914, a little over 2 months before his 21st birthday. He became a member of the 2nd Field Artillery Brigade's headquarters staff, serving as a batman to a more senior officer. He left Australia for active service overseas on the 20th of October 1914 on board the troop ship Shropshire. The 2nd Field Artillery Brigade continued its training in Egypt for several weeks after its arrival. Frank Matt may have been part of the first portion of the brigade headquarters to land at Anzac Cove in the afternoon of the 25th of April 1915. Over the following days, the brigade unloaded more and more guns, pulling them into position and registering on their targets. Aside from a short period in Mudros, suffering from a fever, Batman Bombardier Frank Matt would remain on the peninsula for most of the campaign, transferring to the heavy artillery in mid-July. After the evacuation from Gallipoli, the Australian Imperial Force underwent a period of expansion and reorganisation in Egypt. Matt served with different batteries in the field artillery during this period, but in April 1916, he was transferred to the newly formed trench mortar batteries, relinquishing his Batman duties. He began training with his new unit around the French village of Saley almost immediately. A little over a month later, after being sent to France to fight on the Western Front, he was promoted to corporal. On the 26th of June, while near the front line at Saley, Matt was in charge of a trench mortar firing in support of an Australian raiding party. One of the bombs of his gun fired fell short, landing only a few feet away with the fuse burning. Matt grabbed the bomb, unscrewed the fuse and threw it away, and then upended the bomb and threw it into the mud to dampen the explosion. His officer later wrote that, by his gallant action in removing the live fuse from the bomb, he undoubtedly averted loss of life and injury of officers and men of the infantry who were in close proximity to the mortars when the incident occurred. He was recommended for the Victoria Cross. Although the award was not granted, the recommendation demonstrated the high regard his actions had in the battery. A few weeks after this incident, Corporal Frank Matt's trench mortar battery was transported south to the Somme, where it entered the front line near the French village of Pozières. On the 23rd of July 1916, the Australian 1st Division launched an attack which captured the village despite strong German resistance. Matt was again in charge of the trench mortar and its crew during the attack. On the night after the village was captured, the Australian left flank came under terrific fire from the Germans. Corporal Frank Matt took his gun and detachment into no man's land to get a better shot at his allotted targets. It was later reported that he showed the most heroic gallantry and courage by taking his gun and detachment out and keeping it in action at the objective allotted to him until all his detachment were killed and himself severely wounded. Corporal Frank Matt was taken to the 3rd Casualty Clearing Station, but died not long after arriving. He was buried at the nearby Poucheville British Cemetery, where he lies today under a simple epitaph, loved by all. Matt's senior officer recommended him for the Distinguished Conduct Medal for his actions at Pozières, writing, "On many occasions, Corporal Matt has shown conspicuous bravery under heavy fire, both in the service of his gun and in assisting the wounded." His conclusion was perhaps deemed too emotional for a medal citation. It read, I cannot too deeply deplore the loss of one of my bravest NCOs. Frank Matt's family put a notice in the newspaper to their much-loved son. In it, they called him our Anzac hero. He was 22 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Corporal Frank Oswald Matt, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Hello, party, please. Hey!
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Hello, party in buzz! Hunt! Hello, party, quick! March!
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening.